When we think of 15th century Italian art, we usually picture these calm, serene religious paintings. But behind those canvases, there was an absolute revolution going on. These artists weren't just painters. Oh no, they were innovators, they were engineers, basically scientists, and they were tackling these huge creative problems that would completely redefine reality itself. So, let's get into how they pulled it off.
And this one phrase, it just nails the energy of the time. This spirit of adventure was all about breaking the old rules. See, artists were just not satisfied with following tradition anymore. They were on a mission to discover, to experiment, and to invent totally new ways of looking at the world.
So what exactly were they breaking away from? Well, for centuries, art across Europe was pretty much dominated by what's called the international style. It was this uniform, super traditional approach where everyone basically followed the same playbook. But in the 15th century, that rigid system just crumbles, and it gives way to these distinct schools of painting. All of a sudden, different cities and even individual artists were developing their own unique styles. Local innovation was suddenly way more important than following some universal tradition.
Okay, so this new spirit of innovation immediately slams into a massive technical hurdle. The first huge problem these artists had to crack was this: how in the world do you create the illusion of a three-dimensional world on a totally flat, two-dimensional surface, right? How do you paint depth?
And this is where Paolo Uccello comes in. What's so fascinating about Uccello is that he tackled this problem like a mathematician. He became completely obsessed with this brand new science of perspective. Sometimes he'd create figures that look a little, well, wooden almost, like toys, just because he was so determined to show off that he had mastered this incredibly difficult new technique.
So what was this revolutionary code they had cracked? Well, it really boils down to three surprisingly simple steps. First, you fix the viewpoint. Don't move it. Second, you draw a grid where all the lines look like they're racing toward a single vanishing point way off on the horizon. And third, you just place your figures inside that grid. And boom! Suddenly everything has the right scale, the right distance. It was a total game changer.
All right, let's check out our next innovator and see how this all builds. Andrea Mantegna. He takes Uccello's mathematical grid and then adds this whole new layer to it: history. He was kind of like an archaeologist, He would carefully study all these ancient Roman monuments and artifacts, and then he'd use perspective to build these incredibly solid, convincing, almost stage-like settings for his figures. The world he painted felt so real, so historically grounded.
So, the code of space is cracked. Artists can now create these geometrically perfect, really solid-looking worlds. But when you look at them, you gotta ask yourself, is something missing? Is a realistic world really just a bunch of perfect lines? Does it actually feel real?
What was missing was light. The way it falls on things, the way it creates shadows, the way it defines form and creates a whole atmosphere. This was the next great frontier.
And that brings us to the second major problem these artists had to solve. They needed to move beyond pure geometry and actually learn how to paint with light itself, to capture all its subtle effects and create a whole new level of realism.
And the master of this was Piero della Francesca. Now, the key thing to get here is that he wasn't just using light to, illuminate his scenes. No. He was using light and shadow as a tool to actually model the forms, to basically sculpt his figures. This gave them a real, tangible sense of weight and volume that created a truly convincing illusion of depth. It's brilliant.
Okay, so they've conquered space and they've conquered light, but that leads to the final and maybe the greatest artistic challenge of them all. How do you represent the human body itself? Not just realistically, but beautifully.
On one side of this whole debate, you had Antonio Pogliuolo. His approach, it was pure science. He did this incredibly rigorous study of anatomy, looking at how muscles and sinews work together, all so he could capture the human body in these moments of intense tension and motion. He wanted to show you exactly how the body worked.
But then on the other side, you had Sandro Botticelli. And for him, the goal wasn't scientific accuracy. It was poetic grace. He was totally willing to sacrifice what we'd call correct anatomy, elongating a neck here, softening a shoulder there, if it meant he could get a more beautiful, flowing outline and a more harmonious design overall.
And this comparison just lays it all out so clearly. You've got Pogliuolo, who's aiming for scientific tension. His method is rigorous anatomical study, and the result is this powerful realism. And then you have Botticelli. His goal is poetic grace. His method, intentional distortion. And the result is this beautiful, harmonious design. Two completely different paths to painting the human form.
So, with all these incredible new technical skills, complete mastery over space and light and the human form, you can imagine that the whole purpose and function of art itself started to change in society. Yeah, to put it simply, art wasn't just for telling Bible stories anymore. Now that artists could create such realistic and stunningly beautiful images, art could be used for all sorts of new purposes.
So what were these new roles? Well, for one, art became a way for an artist to really showcase their unique genius and skill. It also became, and this is a quote, a gay display of wealth and luxury for the rich patrons who were paying for it. It became a vehicle for exploring scientific principles. And finally, it became a way to create objects of pure, poetic beauty just for their own sake.
And that really leaves us with a final thought here. This whole era was defined by this tension between science and beauty, right? Between rules and grace. So as you look at this art, I want you to think about it. Does that fundamental contrast between Uccello's mathematical precision and Botticelli's poetic beauty, does that make sense to you as the real engine that was driving this entire revolution?